We found a very affordable place for you, my son, Mark, said. He set a glossy brochure on my coffee table, right next to the plate of lemon pound cake I'd baked for them. My daughter, Susan, sat beside him on my floral sofa. She nodded, avoiding my eyes. She traced the pattern on the doily under the lamp. The air conditioner in the window hummed its usual summer song. I just looked at the brochure. The colours were too bright. It looked cheap. An affordable place? I repeated. My voice was quiet. It felt like it belonged to someone else. Mum, it's for the best, Susan said, finally looking up. You're all alone here. We worry. I didn't say anything. I just felt the worn fabric of my armchair under my fingertips, the same chair my husband Frank used to sit in. I looked at my children. His children. They had his eyes, but not his kindness. Not today. After they left, the house was silent except for the ticking clock in the hall. The scent of lemon cake still hung in the air, a sweet smell that suddenly made me feel sick. I picked up the brochure. Golden Meadows Senior Living. The people in the photos were smiling, but their eyes looked tired. The rooms were small, with metal bed frames and thin-looking blankets. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. The light flickered on, showing leftovers from the church potluck and a carton of milk. I remembered making 5 casseroles for Susan's PTA fundraiser last month. My fingers had ached from all the chopping. I remembered driving 2 hours in the snow to watch Mark's son, little Timmy, when his daycare closed. I'd used my Social Security money to buy him the expensive Lego set he wanted. I closed the refrigerator door. The silence of the house pressed in on me. It wasn't loneliness I felt. It was something colder. I had poured my life into them like water into a sieve, and they were worried about what was affordable. I let the brochure sit on the table for a full day. I watered my ferns. I watched my game shows. I said my prayers. Then, on Tuesday morning, after my second cup of coffee, I went to Frank's old roll-top desk in the spare bedroom. The wood smelled of polish and old paper. I used a small key I kept in my jewelry box to open the bottom right drawer. It was locked for a reason. Inside was a simple brown leather portfolio. Frank had given it to me a month before he passed. "This is your rainy day fund, Carol," he'd whispered, his voice weak from the illness. "Your just-in-case money. For you, not for them." I hadn't opened it in 5 years. My hands trembled a little as I untied the leather strap. Inside were stock certificates and quarterly statements from a company I'd barely heard of. The numbers on the last statement made my breath catch. It wasn't a rainy day fund. It was a hurricane fund. The next morning, I called the number on the statements. A pleasant young woman named Jessica answered. She was patient and kind. She didn't talk to me like I was a child. "Yes, Mrs. Gable," she said, after looking up my account. "Your husband was a very smart man. This portfolio has performed exceptionally well." "I need to liquidate some of it," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "A significant amount." There was a soft clicking of a keyboard on her end. "Of course. That is your right. May I ask what the funds are for?" I looked out the window at my neighbour's prize-winning roses. "I'm planning a move," I told her, "to a very unaffordable place." After the call, I felt a spark. It was small, but it was there. I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat down at my computer. I typed 5-star retirement communities into the search bar. The first result was a place called The Willows at Silver Creek. It looked like a resort. It had a golf course. A week later, I called Mark. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. I could hear his television blaring in the background. "Mum? Everything okay?" he asked. his voice distracted. "Everything is fine, dear," I said. "I've made my decision about Golden Meadows." "Oh, great. That's great, Mom," he said, suddenly attentive. "Susan and I can come over this weekend. We can help you start packing." "That won't be necessary," I said calmly, "but I do need you and your sister to come over next Wednesday, around 10 in the morning." "Wednesday? Why?" I smoothed a wrinkle on my tablecloth. "There are some papers to sign. I'd like you both to be there, to make sure everything is handled correctly." I could almost hear the relief in his sigh. He thought he had won. He thought I was giving in. Little did he know I was just getting started. That week before they came was a busy one. I hired a real estate agent, a nice woman named Martha with a sensible haircut and a kind smile. She walked through my house, her shoes making soft sounds on the hardwood floors. "You've kept this place beautifully, Carol," she said, running a hand over the smooth kitchen countertop. "My husband Frank was very handy," I told her. "He put in these cabinets himself." Martha nodded. "It will sell quickly." I also spoke to a lawyer, Mr. Davison. He was a serious man with glasses perched on his nose. He drafted a new will for me. He also prepared a document giving my children limited power of attorney only for medical decisions if I became unable. Nothing more. The papers felt heavy and important in my hands. On Wednesday morning, the church bells chimed 9 o'clock. I had an hour. I baked a batch of simple sugar cookies, but this time I didn't set any aside for Mark or Susan. The sweet, buttery smell filled my kitchen. It was a smell for me. I set a tray on the coffee table with 3 cups and a pitcher of iced tea. I placed a folder with all the new documents right in the center. I sat in Frank's armchair and waited. The house was quiet. I felt a strange calm, like the air before a summer storm. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. My son's car pulled into the driveway at 10 o'clock sharp. They always were punctual when they thought money was involved. "Morning, Mom," Mark said, kissing the air near my cheek. Susan gave me a quick, tight hug. They both eyed the folder on the table. "You made iced tea," Susan said. "That's nice." "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the sofa. They sat, perched on the edge of the cushions like birds ready to take flight. Mark reached for the folder. "So, these are the admission papers for Golden Meadows?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Mark. Those are not the papers." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. I watched their faces, the flicker of confusion in their eyes. "I took your advice. I decided it was time for me to move." I opened the folder myself. I slid a glossy brochure across the table to them. It was much heavier than the one they had brought me. On the cover, elegant script read, "The Willows at Silver Creek," over a picture of a beautiful stone building surrounded by green lawns and a sparkling pond. Susan picked it up. Her mouth opened slightly as she flipped through the pages. I could see photos of a swimming pool, a library with a fireplace, and a dining room with white tablecloths. "What is this?" Mark asked, his voice sharp. "That is my new home," I said simply. "I've already put down the deposit. The house is going on the market tomorrow." Susan finally looked up from the brochure. Her face was pale. "But how can you afford this? This place must cost a fortune." "It's funny you should ask about affordability," I said, taking a sip of my iced tea. The glass was cool against my hand. "It turns out I can afford it just fine." Mark stood up and started pacing on my good rug. "The house? You're selling the house? What about our inheritance?" "Your inheritance is your business," I told him, my voice even. "This is my life. You were so worried about me being alone here. You wanted me to be somewhere safe. Well, I found a place. We wanted to help you, Mum, Susan said, her voice rising. We found you a perfectly good, affordable place. You found a place you could afford, Susan. Not one I would enjoy, I said. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my garden. Frank left me some investments. He wanted me to be taken care of. I turned back to face them. And I will be. My new home has a very strict visitor policy, by the way. It's designed to protect the residents from undue stress. They just stared at me. The scent of sugar cookies seemed to mock the sour turn in the room. They had no words left. For the first time in a very long time, they had nothing to say at all. They left without touching the cookies or the iced tea. The front door clicked shut behind them, and the silence that followed was heavier than before. It was filled with their anger. I carried the tray back to the kitchen and washed the glasses. The cool water felt good on my hands. The phone started ringing an hour later. It was Mark. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said, his voice tight. "I think you're overwhelmed. Maybe someone from this Willow's place is taking advantage of you." "No one is taking advantage of me, Mark," I said, watching a blue jay peck at the bird feeder outside my window. "Are you sure? A decision this big, at your age, it can be confusing," he pressed. "Maybe we should get someone to look over these papers with you, for your own protection." I just listened to the hum of the refrigerator. He wasn't worried about my protection. He was worried about his inheritance. "The only thing that was confusing," I said softly, "was thinking my children had my best interests at heart." I hung up before he could answer. The next few days were a blur of boxes and packing tape. The sharp smell of cardboard filled the house. I started in the attic, a place I hadn't visited in years. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the bare bulb. I found a trunk filled with Frank's old things. His favorite wool sweater, which still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco. His collection of maps from our road trips. Underneath it all was a small wooden box. Inside, I found a letter he'd written to me, dated just before his last hospital stay. His familiar, spidery handwriting filled the page. He wrote about the stock portfolio. "This is for your joy, Carol," it said. "Not for your obligations. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for living well. You've earned it." I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. The worn paper felt like a shield. Susan called on Saturday morning. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the one she used when she wanted something. "Mum, I was just thinking about the grandkids," she began. "Timmy and Jane love this house. They love your garden. What will I tell them?" "Tell them their grandmother is moving to a lovely new home with a swimming pool," I said, sorting through a box of old Christmas ornaments. I held a fragile glass angel up to the light. "But it's not the same," she whined. "What about family holidays? Tradition?" "Traditions can change, Susan," I said. "You and Mark were ready to change my tradition of living in my own home. This is just a different kind of change." There was a pause on the line. I could hear her breathing. "I have to go, dear. The movers are coming to give me an estimate." I didn't wait for a reply. On Monday morning, a truck from the real estate agency pulled up. A young man in a polo shirt hammered a "for sale" sign into my front lawn. The sound of the hammer was loud and final. It felt good. My neighbour, Margaret, saw it from her window and came right over, carrying a plate of oatmeal cookies. We sat on my porch swing, the chains creaking a familiar rhythm. "Carol, I saw the sign," she said, her eyes kind. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful, Margaret," I told her, taking a cookie. It was warm from her oven. I'm moving to the Willows over in Silver Creek. Her eyes widened. The Willows? My goodness, that place is beautiful, like a country club. She paused. I hope you don't mind me asking, but what did Mark and Susan have to say? I looked out at the neat rows of houses on our street. They had their own ideas, I said. They found me a very affordable place. We both knew what that meant. She just patted my hand. She understood. Mark made one last angry phone call that evening. The television was loud in his background, just like always. He didn't bother with pleasantries. You're actually going through with this, he said. It wasn't a question. Selling Dad's house, throwing away all our memories. It's incredibly selfish. I looked at Frank's empty armchair. I thought of the casseroles, the babysitting, the thousands of small things I had done that were never seen, only expected. The years of putting myself last. A quiet calm washed over me. The anger I expected to feel just wasn't there. You know, Mark, I said, my voice clear and steady. For 40 years I was a wife and a mother. I was a room parent, a carpool driver, a cook and a nurse. I paused, letting the words settle in the quiet of my kitchen. I didn't die. I just stopped being convenient. There was dead silence on the other end of the line. I think Mark was too stunned to speak. I didn't wait for him to find his words. I just gently placed the receiver back in its cradle. The click it made was the sound of a door closing for good. I didn't hear from either of them for the rest of the week. My real estate agent, Martha, held an open house that weekend. I went to stay with my neighbour, Margaret. We sat in her sunny kitchen, drinking tea and doing a jigsaw puzzle of a lighthouse. The smell of her rose bushes drifted in through the open window. Are you nervous, Carol? She asked, fitting a piece of blue sky into place. No, I said, and I was surprised to find it was true. I feel lighter. It was as if I'd been carrying a heavy coat for years and had finally taken it off. Martha called me on Sunday evening. Her voice was full of excitement. We have 3 offers, Carol, all of them over your asking price. I listened as she explained the details. A nice young family with 2 small children wanted the house. They wrote me a letter saying they loved the garden and could picture their kids playing on the lawn. It felt right. Let's accept their offer, I told her. The decision was easy. The house had been a family home for 40 years. It was time for it to be one again. Just not for my family. I spent the next 2 weeks packing. I hired a company to help. 2 strong young men in matching blue shirts carefully wrapped my dishes in paper and packed my books in boxes. I decided what to keep and what to let go. I kept Frank's armchair. I kept my grandmother's china. I kept the box of old photographs that made me smile. I let go of the extra casserole dishes, the boxes of my children's old school projects, the mountains of things I had saved for them. I called a charity, and they came and took it all away. The house felt bigger, emptier. But it wasn't a sad emptiness. It was a peaceful one. Susan showed up unannounced one afternoon. She stood in the doorway of the living room, surrounded by boxes. Her face was tight with disapproval. I can't believe you're really doing this, she said, her arms crossed. I am, I said, taping up a box labelled linens. The sound of the tape pulling from the roll was loud in the quiet room. What about us? What about the grandkids? She asked, her voice cracking a little. Don't we matter? I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. You mattered more than anything for my whole life, Susan. Now, I have to matter to myself. The day before the move, I walked through the empty house one last time. My footsteps echoed on the bare wood floors. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows, making patterns on the walls where pictures used to hang. The rooms looked smaller without all the furniture. I ran my hand along the banister Frank had sanded so smooth. I touched the notch on the kitchen doorframe where we had marked the children's heights each year. They were just memories now. They weren't chains. My lawyer, Mr. Davison, called me that afternoon. "Carol, the sale of the house is final. The funds have been transferred to your account," he said in his serious voice. "You are a very wealthy woman." "I'm not wealthy, Mr. Davison," I replied, looking out at the sold sign on my lawn. "I'm free." The moving truck arrived the next morning, big and white and promising. As the men loaded the last of my boxes, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A woman in a crisp navy blue suit stepped out. She had a warm smile. "Mrs. Gable, I'm Eleanor Vance, the director at the Willows," she said, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm. "I came to personally welcome you. We have a car ready to take you whenever you're finished here." I looked at the moving truck, then at the comfortable-looking town car waiting for me. I took one last look at the house I had lived in for most of my life. I felt no sadness, only a quiet sense of anticipation. "I'm ready now," I said. And I walked away without looking back. The ride to the Willows was smooth and quiet. The leather seats of the town car were soft, and the air conditioning whispered around me. We drove through a set of imposing but elegant wrought-iron gates that opened silently as we approached. There were no guards, just beautiful stone pillars and beds of bright red geraniums. Eleanor drove slowly along a winding road. We passed a golf course, green and perfect. We saw a building with wide glass windows that she told me was the art studio, and another that housed an indoor swimming pool. The scent of freshly cut grass and something sweet, maybe jasmine, drifted through the car's vents. "We believe in an active and engaged life here, Carol," Eleanor said, her voice calm and pleasant. "This isn't a place to wait. It's a place to live." I looked out the window at the people strolling along the paved walkways. They were my age, more or less. They were laughing, talking, walking with purpose. It was nothing like the sad, slumped figures in the brochure my children had given me. This place was alive. Eleanor parked in a reserved spot in front of a 3-story building that looked more like a grand hotel than an apartment complex. She led me inside to a lobby with a high ceiling and a beautiful floral arrangement on a polished wood table. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee. She handed me a plastic key card. "This opens your apartment door and the main entrances after hours," she explained. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a quiet, carpeted hallway. The door clicked open with a soft beep. Inside, sunlight filled a spacious living room. The walls were painted a warm, creamy white. A sliding glass door led to a small balcony that overlooked a pond with a fountain. And there, positioned perfectly by the window, was Frank's worn armchair. The movers had already been. "We took the liberty of placing your husband's chair in the spot with the best view," Eleanor said gently. I walked over and touched the familiar fabric. "Thank you," I whispered. My voice was thick with emotion, but not with sadness. It was gratitude. This was my home now. After Eleanor left, I explored my new apartment. It had 2 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, and a modern kitchen with granite countertops and shiny new appliances. There was a welcome basket on the counter with fresh fruit, a wedge of cheese, crackers, and a small bottle of white wine. I spent an hour just opening and closing cabinets, running my hand over the smooth surfaces. I stood on the balcony and listened to the gentle splash of the fountain. I felt a peace I hadn't realized I was missing. Later that afternoon, I decided to walk down to the community bistro for a cup of tea. The building was quiet, with soft music playing in the hallways. As I was pouring hot water into a cup, a woman with stylish silver hair and bright blue eyes came up beside me. "First day?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed. "Only a little," she said. "I'm Judith. Welcome to the asylum." Her eyes twinkled. "Don't worry. We're the ones running it." I sat with Judith at a small table by a window. She told me she had been a librarian and had lived at the Willows for 2 years. "So, what's your story?" she asked, stirring her coffee. "Everyone has one. Mine is a son who thought my retirement account was his personal venture capital fund." I was surprised by her frankness. "My children found me a very affordable place," I said, using their exact words. Judith nodded slowly, her smile gone, replaced by a look of complete understanding. "Ah, the affordable place. I know that one well. It usually means out of sight, out of mind, and out of their wallets." She took a sip of her coffee. "Well, you landed on your feet, my dear. This place is the opposite of affordable, and it's worth every penny for the peace of mind." The next morning, I had my official orientation with Eleanor. We sat in her comfortable office, and she gave me a welcome packet with schedules for classes, clubs, and events. Then she went over the community policies. "I do want to be clear about our visitor policy, Carol," she said, her tone becoming a little more formal. "It's one of the things that makes the Willows unique." She explained that all overnight guests had to be registered in advance. No guest could stay for more than 3 consecutive nights. And most importantly, any discussion of a resident's finances by a visitor was strictly prohibited on the property. Any visitor who caused a resident distress would have their visiting privileges reviewed. "We are a sanctuary," she said simply. "Your financial life is your own, and your emotional well-being is our priority." I thought of Mark's angry voice, Susan's whining. I thought of the pressure, the guilt. "I think that is a wonderful policy," I said, and I meant it. I settled into a routine. It was a routine I chose for myself. On Mondays, I joined a water aerobics class. The warm water of the indoor pool soothed my old aches. The instructor was a cheerful young woman who played music from the 60s. Judith was always there, splashing in the front row. On Wednesdays, I took a pottery class in the art studio. The feel of the cool, wet clay spinning under my hands was grounding. My first few pots were lopsided and clumsy, but I didn't care. The room smelled of earth and dampness, and it was filled with quiet concentration. I made new friends. There was Judith, of course, and Arthur, a retired history professor with a dry sense of humour who ran the book club. There was Maria, who taught me how to play bridge, her fingers flying over the cards as she told stories of her life as a diplomat's wife. We were all from different places, but we shared a common language of experience. We had lived our lives, and now we were living them for ourselves. My phone rang one afternoon as I was reading on my balcony. The caller ID said it was Susan. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello, Susan," I said. The breeze rustled the leaves of the tree near my balcony. "Mum?" she said. Her voice was strained. "Timmy's birthday is next Saturday. We're having a little party for him at the house." There was a long pause. "We were hoping you would come." I thought about it. I missed my grandson. But I did not miss the feeling of being a guest in my own family, a useful appliance to be turned on when needed. "That's lovely, dear," I said, "but I'm afraid I have plans." "Plans?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "What plans could you possibly have?" "Judith and I are going to a matinee performance of the symphony downtown," I said calmly. "They're providing a shuttle. Afterward, we have dinner reservations." It was all true. The silence on her end was thick with resentment. Fine, she finally snapped. Just send a check then. She hung up. I set the phone down. The sun was warm on my face. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel sad. I just felt distant. A week later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was an invitation. Mark's law firm was hosting its annual Thanksgiving charity dinner. It was a big, formal event at a downtown hotel. A handwritten note from Mark was tucked inside. Mum, this is very important to my career. Please be there. I looked at the invitation. It felt like a command, not a request. I remembered all the years I had spent helping Susan get ready for these events, ironing Mark's shirts, making sure everything was perfect so he could impress his bosses. I called Judith. I need your advice, I said, and told her about the invitation. Oh, the command performance, she said with a dry chuckle. You have to go. I do? I asked, surprised. Absolutely, she said. But you have to go on your own terms. We'll make it a night to remember. Judith helped me pick out a new dress. We went to a nice boutique in town. I chose a simple, elegant, navy blue sheath dress and a beautiful cashmere wrap the color of oatmeal. I even bought new shoes with a small, sensible heel. The night of the dinner, I had my hair and makeup done at the salon at the Willows. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I hadn't seen in a long time. She looked calm, confident, and rested. I didn't ask Mark or Susan for a ride. I hired a private car service. When the sleek black sedan pulled up to the grand entrance of the hotel, the doorman rushed to open my door. I felt like a queen. I found Mark and Susan at a table near the front of the grand ballroom. The room was filled with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted turkey. Mark saw me first. His eyes widened in surprise. Mum, you look nice. Thank you, dear, I said, taking the empty seat they had saved for me. Susan just stared, her mouth slightly open. Mark's boss, a big man named Mr. Henderson, came over to the table. Mark immediately stood up. Mr. Henderson, this is my mother, Carol Gable. Mr. Henderson took my hand. A pleasure, Mrs. Gable. Mark is always talking about his family. How lovely, I said with a polite smile. He must have forgotten to mention my move. I've just settled into the most wonderful place, the Willows at Silver Creek. Mr. Henderson's eyebrows shot up. The Willows? My mother-in-law is on the waiting list there. That place is magnificent, and impossible to get into. He looked at Mark with new respect. Your son must be doing very well to provide that for you. I saw the flicker of panic in Mark's eyes. I just smiled and took a delicate sip of my water. Oh no, I said sweetly, setting my glass down. Mark didn't arrange it. I did. It was a little gift to myself. Mr. Henderson beamed at me. Well, good for you, Mrs. Gable. A woman of independent means. I like that. He clapped a stunned Mark on the shoulder and moved on to the next table. Mark sat down slowly. The smile on his face was frozen. Susan was staring at her bread plate as if it held the answers to the universe. The lively chatter of the ballroom seemed very far away. What was that, Mother? Mark hissed, leaning across the table. His voice was a low whisper. That was the truth, Mark, I said, unfolding my linen napkin. The fabric was crisp and cool. You wanted me to come tonight, so I came. You made me look like a fool, he muttered. No, I said, meeting his angry gaze without flinching. You made yourself look like a fool when you handed me a brochure for a place with metal bed frames. The waiter arrived then to take our dinner orders. The interruption was a relief. Susan ordered the salmon without looking up. Mark just grunted something at the waiter. I ordered the filet mignon, medium rare. I hadn't had a good steak in years. The rest of the dinner passed in a tense silence at our table. Mark and Susan spoke only to the people who stopped by to say hello. They were polite and charming to everyone but me. I didn't mind. I enjoyed my steak. I listened to the speeches. I savoured the rich, dark chocolate of the dessert. When the evening was winding down, I pushed my chair back. "Well, this has been lovely," I said to the table at large. "But my car will be here in 5 minutes." Susan finally looked at me. "Your car?" "Yes, dear," I said, gathering my small evening bag. "I have my own driver tonight." I stood up and smoothed my dress. Mark looked up at me, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why are you doing this, Mom?" "I'm not doing anything, Mark," I said. "I'm just living my life. You should try it sometime." I turned and walked away, my sensible heels making a soft, determined sound on the polished floor. I didn't look back to see their faces. I didn't need to. The ride back to the Willows was peaceful. The city lights blurred outside the window. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. The respect I hadn't been given, so I had to claim it for myself. The next week, I received a check in the mail. It was from Mark. It was for $5,000. The memo line simply said, "For Timmy." It was the money he thought I should have given for my grandson's birthday. I took the check, a pen, and an envelope. I wrote "Return to sender" on the envelope and mailed it back. A few days later, a florist's truck delivered a ridiculously large bouquet of lilies to my apartment. The scent was overpowering. The card was from Susan. "Thinking of you, Mum. We miss you." I took the bouquet down to the common room for everyone to enjoy. I threw the card in the trash. The gestures were too little and far too late. Christmas was approaching. The Willows was decorated beautifully, with a tall tree in the lobby and tasteful white lights twinkling in the gardens. There were concerts, parties, and special dinners planned. I was looking forward to it. Judith and I were in the art studio, glazing our pottery projects for a holiday sale. The air smelled of clay and sweet, sugary glaze. "Heard from the children lately?" she asked, painting a careful blue line on a small bowl. "I got a check and some flowers," I said. "The usual currency of guilt." "Ah, yes. Guilt money." She nodded. "My son sent me a subscription to a Fruit of the Month club. As if a pear could make up for trying to sell my house out from under me." We both laughed. It was good to laugh about it. On Christmas Eve, I got a call. It was a video call from Susan's number. I answered and saw my grandchildren's faces pop up on the screen. Timmy and Jane. "Grandma!" they shouted, their faces close to the camera. "Hello, my darlings," I said, a real smile spreading across my face. It was the first one they had caused in a long time. Susan's face appeared behind them. "We wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas, Mom," she said. Her voice was flat. We talked for a few minutes. The children showed me their new toys. I told them about the big Christmas tree in my lobby. It was stilted and awkward, with Susan hovering in the background. But for the first time, I felt like I was in control of the conversation. I was no longer a service to be requested. I was a person to be called. It was a start. The new year came in quietly. I watched the fireworks from my balcony, wrapped in a warm blanket, a cup of hot cocoa in my hands. The air was cold and crisp. Down below, lights twinkled around the pond. I didn't make any resolutions. I was already keeping the only one that mattered, to live my own life. My days found a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were for water aerobics or a walk around the grounds. Afternoons were for the book club with Arthur or a pottery class. Evenings were for quiet dinners with Judith or a movie in the community theatre. It was a simple life, but it was full. It was mine. One afternoon, Maria, my bridge partner, seemed distracted. She kept fumbling her cards. "Is everything all right, Maria?" I asked during a break. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's my son, David. He wants to borrow money again for another one of his brilliant business ideas. He makes me feel so guilty if I say no." I thought of Mark and Susan. I thought of the check I had sent back. "Maria," I said gently, "the word no is a full sentence. You don't owe him an explanation." She looked at me, her eyes thoughtful. The next week, she told me she had said no to David, and he was angry, but she felt a weight lift from her heart. Spring arrived, painting the lawns of the willows in bright green. I decided to get a plot in the community garden. I spent hours there, kneeling on a soft pad, my hands in the rich, dark earth. The smell of the soil was clean and honest. I planted tomatoes, cucumbers, and a whole row of zinnias, just for the colour. Arthur, the retired professor, would often stop by my garden plot on his afternoon walks. He'd lean on the fence, and we would talk. He told me about his wife, who had passed away a few years ago. I told him about Frank. He had a quiet way about him that was comforting. "You have a real talent for this, Carol," he said one day, admiring my thriving tomato plants. "It's just patience," I told him, "and giving things what they need to grow, without smothering them." He just smiled, and I knew he understood I wasn't just talking about tomatoes. One Sunday, Susan called. Her voice was different. It was quiet, without the usual edge of demand. "Mum," she said, I'm sorry." I waited, listening to the hum of the line. "Mark and we were wrong," she continued, her voice faltering. "We were thinking about ourselves, about money. We weren't thinking about you." It was the apology I had once longed to hear. Now, hearing it, I felt a sense of calm detachment. The wound had already scarred over. It no longer hurt. "Thank you for saying that, Susan," I said. It was all that needed to be said. Could I bring the children to visit you at your new place?" she asked timidly. "Of course," I said. "You can come for lunch next Saturday. But just for lunch. The community has rules." They came the next Saturday. The children were well behaved. Susan seemed nervous, looking around the elegant dining room as if she were in a museum. Mark didn't come. Susan said he had to work. We all knew it was an excuse. We had a nice lunch. The children loved the fancy desserts. Afterward, I walked them to the gate. Timmy hugged my legs. "I like your new house, Grandma," he said. "I like it too, sweetie," I told him. As Susan buckled them into the car, she looked at me. "It's beautiful here, Mum. You seem happy." "I am happy," I said. And it was the simple, unvarnished truth. That evening, I sat on my balcony. Arthur had brought me a glass of iced tea from the bistro. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. The fountain splashed softly in the pond below. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The hurt, the anger, the quiet decisions made in a silent house. I thought of the brochure for that affordable place, and how it had been the key that unlocked this new life. They had tried to put me in a box, but instead, they had set me free. Arthur cleared his throat. "There's a jazz concert on the lawn Friday night," he said, not looking at me. "I was wondering if you'd care to go with me." I turned and looked at him. His kind eyes were watching the last sliver of sun disappear. I thought of my garden, my friends, my peaceful apartment. My life was my own. It was quiet, and it was good. "I would like that very much, Arthur," I said. And as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, I smiled.